I recently picked up a 4-drawer chest by furniture manufacturer, I believe it was called Johnson Carper. They manufactured furniture between the 1920s and I believe 1960s and 1970s. Although there are no manufacturer marks on this piece, I did use Google Lens and found a listing that was exactly the same as mine, and it said that it was made by Johnson Carper. Now for this project, I'm going to do something I've never done before. I try to do something new every time I redo a piece of furniture, and this is to make a custom base. I'm going to replace the 4 legs and put a custom base on it to modernize it. So follow along, and if you find anything that is useful to you, please subscribe, and I would appreciate it. So let's see how this turns out. Here's the part that's not very much fun, but very necessary, and it's cleaning. The whole piece needs to be cleaned inside and out. I use Krud Kutter. I think it's a very good cleaner. And so I need to clean on the inside, the outside, the tops, the bottoms, to get all the grime and dirt that has built up over the years. I didn't take the hardware off when I cleaned. It was kind of convenient to have it on as I pulled out the drawers as I was cleaning, but now I have to take it off, and I have to also re-clean where the hardware was. So that's what I'm going to be doing now, and clean the inside, the outside of the drawers before I start sanding. You really want to make sure that you clean, because you really don't want to have to sand in any of the dirt and grime that's left on the piece. You also want to number your drawers so you make sure that you can put them in the same order as you took them out. So I got a little repair I've got to do. You can see where the wood's coming apart right there. So I'm going to have to glue it. I don't have a syringe. I wish I did, a little glue syringe. So I'm just going to have to pump it in here. Use Now that the cleaning is done, it's time to sand. I'm going to use my SurfPrep for this. I'm using a 180 grit sanding sheet, and it's hooked up to my wet dry vac to try to cut down on as much dust as possible, but I still use a respirator because you don't know what all is going to come off of these pieces. Have to sand the drawers inside and out. I want to remove any scuff marks, pencil marks, stains, especially on the inside and on the sides of the drawers, to bring them back as much as I can to a pristine shape. So this is the biggest repair I have to do on the entire piece. Looks like there might have been some water damage at one point in time. It's lifting up. So obviously this is going to have to be glued, and then I'm going to have to put Bondo on it to rebuild up the side, the piece it's missing, that's worn off over the years. Then we have to glue it and then clamp it, and it's going to have to sit overnight before I can continue on. Here's another small repair I need to do. This bottom rail is not attached to the side any longer, so pop in a couple of brad nails and it's fixed. So now that the repair has dried, I've mixed up some Bondo so I can actually fill in the holes and try to form this back up. I may have to mix up a little bit more Bondo to fill in once it dries. It's pretty deep. Sometimes it takes a couple of applications to get enough Bondo there so you can form it up and be able to sand it down pretty smooth. But I've got some other places on here that I also need to fill in. And I hope that I get it done before my Bondo dries up. However, if you look at this picture, you'll see that I have both blue and white. My Bondo did dry up, and I didn't want to mix a whole lot more Bondo, so I ended up just using Dap Wood Filler and filled in some of the other spots. So after all the repairs on the chest have been done and the wood filler and the Bondo has dried, it's time to sand to make it all smooth. So I'm going in with my SurfPrep again. I'm using a 180 grit piece of sandpaper on it. And so I have to go simply over the entire chest and sand all this down. You want it to be absolutely as smooth as possible, because any imperfections will show once it's painted. As I anticipated, the repair that I had made before on that edge does need more Bondo. Once I got it sanded, it needed to be filled in. So I mixed up some more Bondo. I'm going to fill it in. I'm also going to put a piece of saran wrap on it to try to make a little bit of a mold, try to hold it in place as it dries. This is the part of the project I've been looking most forward to, and that's to make a custom base for this chest. I'm going to make it out of red oak, and I'm cutting the front and the two sides. Next I will go ahead and cut the legs. I'm going to cut the legs at a 60-degree angle. I will also finish this in a golden oak stain by Minwax. I also want to give a shout out to DIY Wife, which has an excellent YouTube video on how to make these bases. Okay, I'm going to cut the angle on the legs. I want a 60-degree angle that's going to basically fall right in the middle of the leg. Now obviously my miter saw does not cut a 60-degree angle, so I'm using this little jig. It's basically a piece of wood cut at a 45, and then if I want to cut a 60-degree angle, I just subtract 45 from 60 and I get 15, and I set my miter saw at 15 and I get a 60-degree angle. Actually, the hardest part about this is getting a clamp on here to get the wood so it doesn't move while I cut. Very good. My 60-degree angle. See better that way. And that's a better shot of the jig, just a 45. So I'm going to cut these legs about 5.5, maybe 6 inches. I'm going to go measure here and decide, then I'm going to cut off. So it's easier if you cut with the long board first, then you start cutting your legs. That way you got something to hold on to. Hold on, I'm going to decide how long I want these. I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got it clamped in. I didn't think you'd want to watch me clamp it in because it takes a minute, but I don't want this board to move. So now I'm going to cut the second leg. The other two legs that go in the back, I'm not going to cut an angle on them. So what I did was cut from the opposite end of the board where I made the first cut for the second leg. That way I can set my stops on my T-track when I make my cuts to make them, I'm going to make them 6 inches. That way I make sure that the cut is the same each time. That looks pretty good. Now I can take my jig off. This is something that's really easy to make, and if you're going to make these kind of cuts very often, or even any at all, this would be a great thing to make. It's just, like I said, a piece of wood. It's about that thick. People make them at different thicknesses, but just simply a 45-degree angle, and then you just got to do the math. Okay, so put this back to 0. And now I'm going to stops. Okay, close enough. As long as they're all the same. Here we go. Here goes my tube backwards. This around and I'll do my left front one. Okay, now it's time to make some pocket holes and put it together. Now it's time to drill the pocket holes in the base, in the front and the two sides. I'm using a Kreg 720 pocket hole jig. I've got my wet dry vac hooked up to it to extract as much of the sawdust as possible. And so we're just going to drill all these holes and then we're going to put the base together. So for the two sides, I'm drilling 2 pocket holes on each end and then a pair of pocket holes in the middle. For the front, I'm also drilling 2 pocket holes on each end, and then I'm going to drill a pair of pocket holes, 3 of them, one close to each end and then one in the middle, and that should be enough to attach it to the base. Well, I thought I was done with sanding, but not quite. Before I assemble the base, I need to sand it down, the 2 sides and the front and the legs, to make sure it's all as smooth as possible. And to also, especially on the angled part of the legs, to smooth those out since they were cut. I'm then going to glue the pieces together. I'm offsetting the front a little bit from the legs, just so that it's not exactly even. I think it's going to look a little bit better inset. So I'm using these 2 pieces of scrap. They're about 1/8 of an inch thick that I had saved from an old project. And then I'm going to let this glue dry, and then we'll go and assemble the base. Okay, so I got the sides and the legs all screwed together, and I glued the front of the stand. Now I'm about ready to put in the pocket screws here in the front. And one thing I like to mention back in here is, I want to show you this. This is a Riobi drill. And it goes from 0, basically, to drill, which is something past 25 on their settings. You want to set this at a fairly low. I've set mine at about 4, because you want the drill to stop when it hits resistance. Otherwise, you could, and drill them slowly. Otherwise, you could risk, setting them too far in and going through the other side of the wood. And you don't want that, obviously. and I didn't go through, which is a good thing. Okay, we're going to do the other side now. Something I can back here, and we're going to drill these last two in. Okay, so this turned out pretty good, I think. It's actually level, which is nice. Let me turn this camera around a little bit. So this is kind of what it looks like. Like I said, I used this to make some space so that it wasn't, you know, just flush up against the legs. I think having backed off a little bit makes that look kind of nice. So, it says, you know, keep your scraps. You know, this came off the first piece of furniture that I flipped. So here's where the transformation happens. I've already primed this chest with 2 coats of Sherwin-Williams Extreme Bond primer. I do have some bleed through. It's going to be okay since I'm painting this in black, and it wasn't much anyway. I put 2 coats of Sherwin-Williams Tricorn black on the chest, and I'm then eventually going to spray it with a matte polyurethane water-based by Varathane. Since I painted the drawers within the chest, I now have to go back and paint the tops of the drawers that were covered when I painted the chest. Also, I have to paint those parts of the chest that were covered by the drawers. So that's both the insides here and on the front where the drawers, where the door shelves are. So I've kept my brush moist with a spray bottle to minimize brush strokes as much as possible. I'm painting all this in a Vivor paint spray tent I had purchased, and this is the first time I've had an opportunity to use it. And it was really nice because once everything was painted and drying, I can zip it up and keep any kind of dust or bugs out of it. So I'm going to have to finish this up, and when all this is dry, like I said, I'm going to go back over with 2 coats of a matte polyurethane finish in a matte sheen, and that is a product by Varathane. I have to admit I had some problems this time spraying the poly. I just could not get my sprayer dialed in for some reason, and I had to constantly watch for runs and drips and smooth them out with the brush before it dried. If it dried, I was going to have to sand it and respray. I use Mama's butter from Dixie on all the drawers, the inside and the outside on the non-painted areas. It really enhances the wood grain, and it just smells great, and it eliminates odors, and this is the second time I've used this product. A different scent. The first time I used it, I used an orange scent, but I think I like this scent a little bit better, but it just makes the wood look really beautiful. Okay, so it's now time to attach the new base. So I'm using 1 1/4 Kreg nails. I want to double check my measurements and make sure that I actually have to admit I made a mistake on this base. You're probably not going to notice it, but I wanted these braces to be inset. Well, the front one is inset, the outside are outset. So I didn't put the spacers on quite correctly. Luckily it doesn't stick out on either side, so I think I'm going to be good to go. So I'm going to attach the first one here. Alright, we're going to attach another one to hold it in place. And that should be good to go from here on out. Alright, so from here on it's smooth sailing. So the project is complete. If you remember where we started, and this is where we finished. So stay tuned for more furniture refinishing projects from the next season.